I heard the others discussing what species were best for what jobs, and I heard them laughing at the idea of humans being worth anything, so I had to intrude upon their jovial interval. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing your chat about what species are best in what positions on the ship. Mind if I join you to tell you a tale?" As I was only familiar with one of the languages being used at the table, it took a moment for my universal translator to update and present their assent to me. "Excellent. Let me tell you the tale of when I met my first humans. I found myself needing an engineer because mine had rolled into his dormancy cycle while on shift, 3 months ahead of expectations, so I had to stop at a spaceport and ship it back to Krignikor. While there, I had to find a new engineer to continue because, as we all know, flying without one is a way to summon all of the technical problems of the universe onto your ship. So there I was, looking through the available talent on the station, becoming increasingly discouraged at the lack of quality anything, when I stumbled on a pair-bonded set of humans, Michael and Karina, looking to join a crew headed anywhere, so long as they could get off the station. I called the comm listed and set up a meeting with them. I was surprised when they arrived. I had always heard humans were small, but I was not really prepared for how much smaller than normal they are. Together, they barely made the minimum mass for entry into our spacing guild. But there were 2 of them, and I was desperate, so I decided to give them a chance because they, between them, had the minimum engineering certifications I needed. I asked them what special environmental conditions they needed, and they assured me that anything on my ship should be something they can work with. They easily fit into the vacated quarters for the ship's engineer, and they were happy to share the quarters. They hauled all of their own belongings onto the ship. When given the introduction to the remainder of the crew, they were very personable and friendly. They even promised to kill boredom with us by teaching us some games. All in all, it sounded very odd and different, but none of us cared, so long as they could keep us in the sky when needed. The weird part begins when we toured the ship. As we all know, the optimal temperature for water and carbon lifeforms is approximately 20 degrees. That is, of course, the temperature that I keep my ship at, and while some of my crew prefer 1 or 2 degrees in either direction, it is a universally accepted temperature for everyone in the public areas of the ship. The humans were no different in this regard. The weird part, though, is when we got to engineering. I showed them the environmental suit storage bin, as I got mine out of storage and began to put it on. That's when Karina asked if there was a radiation leakage problem. I, of course, was horrified. I would never allow such a thing to go unmitigated on my ship, and I told her so. She then asked why I was putting on an envirosuit to go into engineering. I was dumbfounded. How could beings with certifications in engineering not know why I needed an environmental suit to enter such a hot environment? It was nearly 48 degrees in there. I wouldn't last long enough to give them a tour of engineering, let alone work in there, without an envirosuit to keep me cool. So I replied that it's to protect me from the extreme heat of the engine room. Michael then asked what level of heat I am speaking of, and when I told him, they looked at each other and shrugged, and then went in. No envirosuit. They just walked into the engine room unprotected. I struggled in the clumsy suit to follow them into the blast furnace of the engine room as they looked around and identified all of the components needed to keep the ship operating. I, in the suit, began feeling the effects of the extreme heat almost immediately, and they, if any change actually happened at all, just looked like they were a bit damp. That's it. They truly did not care about the heat. It was nothing to them. Time passed. They were with my ship for about a year, and made use of the Simfrec room together, often. None of us ever bothered them when they were using that space, and none of us ever asked them what they were doing in there. None of our business, and we all made use of the Simfrec room for a variety of purposes ourselves. It was a great way to visit a favourite place or do some exercise, or even to eat favourite foods that we couldn't experience any other way. even if the calories were false and provided no nutritional value. They taught us many of their games, and we discovered that they were a pleasant novelty to fill in the downtime. I came to particularly like one of their simple games, which they called Reversey. We shared our literature and music with them, and they with us. You will be amazed at how varied their music is. There truly is nothing quite like it. But anyway, I digress. It was about a year that they were with us, doing an admirable job at preventive maintenance and fixing any issues that arose when howler pirates attacked us. We tried to run and failed, and my ship was not equipped to fight them in ship-to-ship combat, so I relented and surrendered to them. As they approached for docking, I advised my crew what was happening. Michael approached me and asked if I was really just going to let the howlers win and take all our cargo. I gently but firmly informed Michael that I had no alternative, because I could not fight them, as the ship was not equipped to do so. I outlined that it was too costly to allow a firefight on my ship, and that the loss of cargo was less expensive than the repairs such an effort would incur. Michael seemed extremely agitated by this. He did not like the idea of letting them get away with it. I advised him that I did not like the idea either, but I had no recourse. That's when he smiled. He said, "What if I take the fight onto their ship?" Dumbfounded, his question horrifying me to my very core, I replied, "But you can't. It's far too cold on their ship. You'll freeze." He looked at me, glared right into my face, and said, "Let me worry about that." I stared, dumbfounded, and replied, "You know that their ship is negative 30 degrees, right? That howlers come from a world that is frozen ice, and they have special adaptations that allow them to survive in that world, including heavy layers of blubber and a thick fur pelt. You know this, right? You have neither a layer of blubber nor a thick coat of fur. You clearly are used to an environment warmer than standard, since you can go in that engine room for hours at a time without protection. You won't survive in there." Again, he replied, "Let me worry about that. I'm doing it unless you specifically order me not to. Someone has to teach these jackals a lesson, and it might as well be Karina and I." Again, I was dumbfounded. Not only was he proposing he risk his life, but also that of his bonded partner. I was speechless. Before I could even think to tell him no, he turned and left with a, "Thanks, boss. You won't regret this." The howlers demanded that all crew join in our mess hall, unarmed, so that we wouldn't be able to try anything. And that's where I and the rest of the crew besides Michael and Karina went. The sounds of the howler ship attaching to airlock 3 could be heard reverberating throughout the ship, and that's when we heard Karina yell, "They're in airlock 3! Followed, a moment later, by the two of them running past the entrance to the mess hall in some strange attire that I had not seen before. It looked as though they had strapped fuel tanks of some sort to their banks, and were carrying strange-looking tool-like objects in their hands, as though they were weaponry. The sound of running changed, and Michael reappeared for a moment, with a huge toothy expression on his face. He pointed the weapon-looking thing in the air and let out 2 quick bursts of intense flame towards the ceiling, before laughing and running back towards Karina. I don't know exactly what they did, but the exact moment the airlock door broke its seal, altering the pressure of my vessel slightly, the screams began. I say screams because that is what they were. Not the usual howls that the howlers make to communicate, but high-pitched yips and barks of terror and pain. There was another pressure change, and then a draft of extremely cold air began to flow across the floors of my ship. We closed the door to the mess hall to keep the cold out. And we waited. We waited for the howlers to come take vengeance upon us for daring to defy them. But then the door opened again. It was Karina. Her poofy-looking garment was covered in blood and gore. She smiled at us and said, "Coast is clear, Captain. You've got yourself a second ship if you want it. We even turned up the thermostat for you." I quite cautiously left the mess hall. There were dead howlers in the airlock, and the door to their ship was closed. The air was cold, too cold, but I knew my life support systems would rectify that quickly enough. I asked Karina, "Where's Michael?" She replied, "Oh, he's in there." She indicated the other side of the airlock. "Getting some food. They have some great menu items that we haven't had a chance to have on this ship. Why let it go to waste?" So, that is the tale of my time with some humans. You might think they're puny and weak, but they are not. It turned out that both Karina and Michael were only minimally trained in engineering as a side job for their real vocation. They were both trained in the human Space Force as Special Forces soldiers, and the engineering training was a hobby they both enjoyed, as well as a backup in case a human space Navy ship they were on lost too many engineers. Yes, that's right. Their high-quality engineering work was just their side hobby. Their real vocation was killing, and they, just two humans, dispatched an entire Howler pirate crew of 20 by themselves. On the Howler ship in the Howler temperatures. They solidified my respect for humans that day, and my fear. I decided to give them the Howler ship when we reached the next port, and I sought a more conventional and stable and predictable engineer replacement. So, now that I have told my tale, I urge you to not laugh at humans. They are tiny, yes, but any of them out here in space are of a hardy stock that is absolutely terrifying when they are faced with any sort of adversity.